both glad and honored to take part in this conference. It's an homage to a scholar from whom I've learned not just history, but also how to be a mentor, how to conduct myself with my students, and how to be, I think, very serious without taking myself seriously. I think all of this I've learned from him. I was lucky enough to attend 6 or 7 of Mosse's different seminars in Jerusalem. And he was the one who introduced me to German history, and to German Jewish history, and to the history of sexuality. And after a detour of more than 20 years in faraway fields of French history and religious history, history of Catholicism, I'm back to the questions that Mosse first introduced me to. I'm working on gay and lesbian German Jews in Weimar, Berlin, and Palestine, Israel, and the migration and the ways in which they created gay and lesbian sociability in Palestine in the 30s and in Israel in the early 50s. And I think that this is to show how immense and long-standing was his impact on me, as well as on very, very many colleagues and students in Jerusalem. So I really want to use this opportunity to thank the people who have shaped the Mosse legacy in Jerusalem, and first and foremost, of course, John, as well as Sky. We have a very interesting panel, so we will just go straight to business. I will say a few things about the 3 presenters, and then they will go by the order. I think that we're going to change a bit. So our first speaker will be Dr. Regina Mühlhauser, who is a researcher at the Humboldt Foundation for the Advancements of Science and Culture, and a co-founder and coordinator of the international research group Sexual Violence in Armed Conflicts. A 2010 book, Eroberungen, Sexuelle Gewalttaten und intime Beziehungen deutscher Soldaten in der Soviet Union, is forthcoming in English next year. She's currently working on the history of the idea of sexual violence as weapon of war, and on a project called Et Different France, how British soldiers speak about sexuality and violence in the European and Asian theaters of the Second World War. In addition, she is thinking of the meaning of universal jurisdiction while monitoring a trial in Stuttgart in which 2 leaders of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda in the Democratic Republic of Congo stand trial for war crimes. And she will talk to us today about sexual violence as a weapon and strategy of war and genocide. The second speaker will be Dr. Anna Eikhofer, who is an associate professor at the University of Warwick. Her first book, The Last Ghetto, An Everyday History of Theresienstadt, is forthcoming with Oxford University Press. She has published 2 short books in the past, and she is currently working on transgressive sexuality in the Holocaust and on a generational history of communism in Central Europe, 1930 to 1970. The title of her talk today is People Without History Are Dust, Queer Desire in the Holocaust. Michael Steinberg is the Barnaby Conrad and Mary Critchfield Keeney Professor of History and Professor of Music and German Studies at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. From 1916 to 1918, he served as president of the American Academy here in Berlin, and at Brown, he served as the founding director of the Lafer Center for the Humanities and as vice provost for the arts. His books include The Trouble with Wagner, it was published by Chicago last year, as well as the edited volume Makers of Jewish Modernity, Princeton 2016, which won the National Jewish Book Award for Nonfiction. He also published Listening to Reason, Culture, Music, and Subjectivity in 19th Century Music, and The Meaning of the Salzburg Festival. Last but not at all least, between 2009 and 2013, he served as the dramaturg on a co-production of Richard Wagner's Ring of the Nibelung at the Berlin Stadtoper and the Teatro alla Scala in Milan. And Michael will talk about anti-Semitism and the politics of displacement. Please, we'll start. As I said, we're going to change the order of the presentation. I will start with Regina.